briefing is three civic initiatives, RPR, Culture Group, Platform for Strategic Initiatives, Culture 2025, and Culture Congress activists, announcing their decision to invite into the Alliance of Culture Natalia Kryvda, RPR Culture Group Chief Expert, Mykola Skyba, Platform for Strategic Initiatives, Culture 2025, and Olena Pravylo, President of the NGO Culture Congress Activists, are taking floor. Good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. Thank you for finding time to join us. I represent today the organization which is, I hope, famous to Ukrainian society, Reanimation Package of Reforms and the Culture Group. We are the initiators of uniting the constructive forces to advocate changes in culture, advocate reforms in culture, and to form the program of comprehensive changes which are so important for Ukrainian society today. A few months ago, RPR Group Culture criticized the strategy of the Ministry of Culture, which was announced as the national strategy. After the criticism, we need some constructive steps. Organizations which more than any other organizations achieved contextual changes in the culture were the Congress 2025 and the Culture Congress activists, and we came up with the initiative, well, maybe not to get united, but to join our efforts. Good afternoon. So when any movement like that, merging or unification takes place, we always ask question why. Why do we unite these initiatives? First of all, for a year and a half, we are in the process of developing strategy, and we understand we can write a perfect document, but there will be no one to implement it into life. And there are many reasons to that, and one of the reasons for our initiative is that we need to consolidate efforts to group together, to develop the backbone for these initiatives. The culture is one of the least reformed sectors of life during the 24 years of independence, and we can say that we have now a certain mistrust which is in the way of any reforms in the state in different spheres of life, and to change that situation, to rewrite this catastrophic scenario. For that, we need to group together and to create a network which will be able to take responsibility for implementing the scenarios which we are developing. They include the work with the grassroots initiatives, initiatives from the territorial communities, and Olena Pravylo works with little municipalities, and she will talk about that. This initiative for us, Alliance of Culture, is so important because when you meet activists from different regions of Ukraine, we hear that, okay, you are there in Kiev and you say that you are doing something national for the whole country. to demonstrate that Kiev is open and activists and experts in the sphere of culture are open for any changes and visions. For that, we join our efforts, and the Congress of Culture Congress will organize different sessions, and we are planning that the strategy which will be suggested in the result of this alliance of culture will find support and will be accepted at the regional level, and we will also be able to receive some ideas from the regions of Ukraine, including maximum experts. We will be able to become one big community which will bring in new values and new vision into this work of this whole sector. And besides getting united, we understand that this is the challenge, because any consolidation initiatives in the culture, these are different from what the changes in politics or economy. We understand that this is the process which will require plenty of discussions, because we understand that culture is not some entertainment, that is developing some sense, and the consolidation should be taking place at the level when we will have soloists, not the choir, but we need to feel each other, we need to develop empathy, and we hope that this is important, because the culture of empathy will become a certain common code, and that is so important for other spheres of life, because this is the first sphere that indicates that there are certain challenges or problems, and then I believe it is so important to develop the rules of game. I compare that with the street team that is gaining professionalism. First, the boys are just playing with the football, and they don't have a pitch, but then they grow up, they invite others, they agree on the rules of game, they agree on the form, and this is the process which will be taking place in culture. We need to come to agreement, we need to get these rules of game integrated so that they become a certain cultural code. And then probably the attitude to institutions of the society will change.
We can go on along our presentation. I'd like to remind you that given that the culture group in RPR has been regularly talking and declaring this is one of the key messages. This is the culture as a measure to resolve social, political, military and other conflicts, and we see that it is culture that needs to propose and offer scenarios to help the society come out of the crisis dead end of today, to overcome critical crisis situation, and it needs to be discussed really. This is what Mykola mentioned. And this has been why we joined, in order to advocate our strategical expert vision. It's really something that is very much regarded and prevents and is aimed actually to prevent the conflict and this war that we are having today. We do understand that the need to stop this crawling conflict, which is like a wildfire, is not a one-off event, and it may not be possible to stop the war by just saying stop. It won't solve the conflict. Culture is rather a long process. It is about skills of overcoming obstacles, like you need ones at cheese making, because it needs to rest to mature, and certain technological procedures need to be observed to obtain the desired products. And in the same vein, we need certain stages and steps to be done in culture to observe a certain cycle of actions. And I think that culture really sets people's minds to think this way, rather than letting people go along the narrow corporate lines. And we had a number of events carried by Culture 2025 initiative in a variety of cities across Ukraine to foster this vision of culture as a sphere of social existence, also as something that shapes collective thinking, as a measure to affect social and societal events. That is, we are sending long ways with far-reaching objectives in order to ascertain our position. You know, the process of consolidation is a challenge for us too, because we do understand that every one of us has a background of his own and a vision of his own, and there is a complex project of reaching agreements for the sake of upcoming changes. And I'd like to remind you that our alliance is a good example of this, which shows that everything is possible. It won't be done in one day, but we do hope that the alliance will breathe this spirit into other groups and organizations, into the minds of other experts, so that prevent situation that we've used to see with people going along their own lines stubbornly despite attempts to consolidate. And we are going to fight for the future that we want to live in. It might be necessary to underscore that these civic and cultural competences that we ultimately speak about will be implemented also through the alliance, and I'd like to thank our colleague Vladimir Dobrov for giving and inventing this name of Culture Alliance. And it is about overcoming one's egotistic interest for the sake of mutual agreement and mutual effort. And if we can go one slide before, you will see that the RPR Culture Group takes responsibility for the implementation of those agreements already reached in the area of culture for the sake of their embodiment in the legislative field. And I'd like to remind the esteemed audience that the writing and the adopting of the strategy on culture as one of the elements of coalition agreement is a bit behind the deadline, and we think that the alliance will become an instrument and an institution well versed to make this happen, as it has been provided for in the coalition agreement. And we also pay special attention to the advocacy of matters of particular importance for culture. We see that the time is already ripe to provide for this type of advocacy, because culture has been expressly excluded from agendas of many political forces and parties, and culture is still widely perceived as a kind of entertainment thing. And if we are to foster the wider acceptance of culture, we will need to join our efforts around our advocacy line, and we need to use our word of mouth, our action to influence others to advocate for culture. It is our shared responsibility. It is not liability, though, but this is a conscientious step to be taken by everyone to create a bigger information field for the sake of culture and its flourishment, because ultimately this will positively affect the development of our society. In our closing words, I'd like to mention the function of monitoring, which is also important. And I'd also like to refer to the cultural decision-making procedure, when a decision is not just being shaped by someone's emotions, but it is also made with a view of proper criteria, indicators, and with the hope that our initiative will establish an example, will set an example of how to implement this long-term and far-reaching monitoring efforts. And we will notify you on a regular basis, we will send you messages, we will do our public appearances to notify us how things are going. And now we are ready to take your questions. Thank you, friends, please.
Somewhat philosophical question. The Sandel, very famous European expert on culture, we talked to him off the records, and he said, Ukraine survives through the times of new heroes. Just imagine, on the 1st of September, Kybar come to tell about the war in the east, about the Donetsk airport, how to fix these new heroes in the policy of culture, not the Молодая Гвардия, but the defenders of Donetsk and Lugansk airport, our contemporary heroes. Thank you. You emphasized very well. If we think about politicians in this context, we will see that politicians' policy is something that we support. And we were saying that we do support the idea that culture shouldn't be administered from the top. We have the heroes like that, but this is our common responsibility, and the support of a certain positive image is very important. I know there are several groups of people who work on that. We were also saying that Natalia is teaching mythology, and we with Mykola also part of the group of new mythology. And so we can offer certain senses, and different institutions can take them. Another issue is probably we shouldn't be saying that the heroes should be only like that. Thank you for this question, Pierre Nora. Symbolic policy. In Ukraine, we haven't been forming this symbolic policy, which would be the foundation, and that is not just via the heritage, but via the contemporary practical activity. European countries identify themselves in European space. Symbolic policy as the set of tools is just being formed in Ukraine. Creating the pantheon is our responsibility as citizens and as experts. We are giving correct names. We work with words because words express sense. New symbolic policy of Ukraine is to be formed. Unfortunately, we cannot see the work of that ministry. I don't They call it Minstead, people call it Ministry of Information, which should become the platform for this work in the sphere of symbolic policy. If not them, then we. This is our responsibility. I believe that we emphasize how important it is to form such pool of experts with all the initiatives, and there should be experts, and these issues are to be discussed, and the decisions should not be made only by civil servants. When we are talking about creating certain messages and heroes, we are talking about who's doing it. Are we talking about the party which develops it, or different experts can offer these? So we will communicate the idea that experts are to be involved, and the work of experts is to be of high level and is to be paid for well. And heroes and those who believe in them, for all of them it is important to understand that they have something to defend. That their work is based on very strong values, and cultural factor is very important, because that is where values are developed. If we say that that's the value of freedom, the value of a human being, then we need to say that yes, we defend the human being from totalitarianism. Culture is the sphere which allows to demonstrate symbolic, real opportunities. Any other questions, dear colleagues? The question from UCMC, it's not philosophical but more technical. To have a website, a page in the Facebook, how can people contact you? Or maybe you have some vacancies for those who want and are ready to help you. Some volunteers, volunteers. I emphasize that this is somewhat different from the alliances in politics or economy. Everyone takes up a certain responsibility that we can cope with. There are 3 initiatives. We all have our online resources. All 3 have their own resources, but we don't have any one common web site. As to vacancies, that's absolutely volunteer, for volunteers. That's initiative for volunteers. I would like to repeat what our colleague mentioned. We are open. We cannot imagine clearly how to actively demonstrate this openness, but we'll be working in this direction. The civil society institutions, that is what we would like to emphasize. I would like to thank all our colleagues from Culture 2025, from Culture Congress activists, and from RPR Culture. All of them have done a lot on developing values. Our colleagues who are not here, they will continue their work, our work, and we believe that we are opening the window of opportunities. Any other questions? Then.
Do you have any plans of collaborating, at least from your side, with the ministry, the name of which you've forgotten, and with the Ministry of Culture? And do you count on this support at the macro and local levels? You see, I'm really sorry for forgetting the name of that Ministry of Information and Propaganda, but exactly RPR culture group perceived a strong pressure from government authorities and from the ministries. There was an avalanche of proposals made on behalf of the Ministry of Culture as well. There have been declarations so far, but we are still looking for pathways for cooperation. It would be preliminary, to put it correctly, to speak about collaboration or cooperation, but attempts to look for cooperation, yes, there are there, and we have been working on the 2 draft legislations, the one on preservation and development of cultural heritage, and we criticize the position of the Ministry of Culture, and our colleague who's sitting here, Ms. Kolesnik, can contribute to that. And the second draft concerns openings in the cultural area and in the Ministry of Culture. This bill was submitted by the ministry and by Irina Podolak, the MP, and we try to cooperate. So in this regard, yes, we do cooperate with the Ministry of Culture, and nothing to be said about our cooperation with the Ministry of Information. Thank you then. We'd like to thank you for your press briefing.